Welcome to the Institutional Infrastructure Committee meeting. I am Lisa Kihokuloli-Shower, and I am sitting in for two of my other regents. I am a member of the committee, but our committee chair, Regent Shetler, is not able to make it today, and Regent Redmond is not able to make it today. So we have one agenda item. It is facilities and capital planning. Pieces of this item are going to be presented during our next session with the full committee of the Board of Regents. I am hopeful that we can review this item, and we have all of the materials available. If there's additional questions, we can certainly follow up in the big session together. But at this point, I think I will just turn it over to Vice President for Finance and Administration, Stacy Pearson, and Associate Vice President for Facilities, Olivia James.
Thank you. Thank you. And I will start with, this is a facilities and capital planning update. We gave our first presentation about a year ago, I believe that was the case, to identify some of our deferred maintenance issues, as well as the studies that had been presented, as well as a plan to start addressing the deferred maintenance. And this update is to identify the actions that we have taken, both in our processes as well as how it's impacting our capital budget request, utilizing the data that we gained from these studies. So I will turn it over to Olivia Yang to go through the information.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. So the information item is intended to provide the context for the presentation on the state capital budget request. And so the idea here is we're telling you about the buckets of money that's available and the ways we, the standards by which we inform how we spend the money. So because right now we're still mostly state funded as far as capital funding, the state has like two kinds of money. They have the annual operating budget money to maintain the buildings. That pays for salaries of all the different staff. And there's what we call the capital budget, which is actually bond money. And there's major and there's minor. And we have discovered there's also an in-between that we call standalones. And so majors are over 10, minors are under 2, and between 2 and 10, you could also ask for these standalone projects. And so what we've been trying to do is, instead of looking at the money as individual categories, we've been saying money is money. Let's find out how we can best optimize the expenditure of the money, whether it's on a daily, annual, or major, minor capital basis, to address our problems. And our problem, as you know, on the facility side is we have a huge deferred maintenance backlog, just like everybody else, whether you're a higher ed institution, state agency, or some local jurisdiction. And we are then informed by some of the standards in our industry. We usually talk about APA. APA stands for APPA. APPA stands for Association of Physical Plant Administrators, which tells you how old the association is, because nobody says physical plant anymore. So it's been around for a long time. But they've developed different standards of care for maintaining a building, whether you're a maintenance person, a custodial person, grounds person, or whatever. And we use those standards. We try to hit the middle of those, but we're finding that for a variety of reasons, our annual operating budget is falling behind, and that's in part contributing to our deferred maintenance problem. All of which to say that on the one hand, on the capital budget request, we are trying to make sure that we are reducing the amount of space that we have. So given the amount of money we have less space to take care of. And at the same time, we are looking at the condition of our buildings, so that we can, what we colloquially say, we don't want to change the oil on a dead car. So you look at a building that's worthy of reinvestment, and that's where you spend your money, whether it's capital reinvestment money or operations and maintenance money. And so if you have a building that's in poor shape, ideally you go to the people in the building and say, perhaps we can help you find a better building to be housed in. But failing that, we try not to put too much money in fixing up those individual parts. If in the long run, we think that the building should be demolished or ready for major reinvestment. So basically, that's our approach. And so out of this context, I wanted you to understand or be aware of that context so that when you look at the capital budget, which is last session was different from before, and this one builds on those differences and tries to get a sharper and sharper alignment of funding with needs. And that's my view.
Excellent.
8 minutes. Your questions.
Very well done.
Thank you.
I do have a couple questions. So we know that we've had a few new buildings, which is very exciting and has been the result of a lot of long-term planning to be able to achieve some of those new buildings. And the philosophy that I think you've already mentioned was very clear in the materials in terms of kind of no new, I can't
No
remember,
net new.
no net new, right? So I was curious in kind of the next 10-year window, which is forecasted in this request to send over to the state.
Mhm.
Not being as familiar with some of the specific buildings, particularly on the Pullman campus, is there any new buildings beyond the ones that we have already discussed recently that
Well, I think, so when we were very careful to say no net new.
right?
Because we understand that if we want to go beyond state funding and go for donor funding in particular, for some reasons, donors are not interested in renovating an old building.
Sure.
So we thought, okay, that's fine. But the idea is if you build a new building, then you move people out of the old bad building and you demolish the old building. That way, the money that is available to maintain the old building can be transferred to the new, et cetera, et cetera. This is the philosophy behind the USDA ARS building. Demolish Johnson, put a new building that's actually about half the size. So that helps us a little bit on the annual operating side. What you'll see later today is our first foray, major foray in fundraising for a building, which is the Boylan Schweitzer Engineering Hall. And so that is also a new building coming up. It's actually at the top of the list. It's our number one priority. So we are asking the state for 30 million for a building and 10 million for campus infrastructure to be matched by 40 million of donor money, which would give us 70 million for the building and 10 million for the associated infrastructure. Where Boylan is located is actually the oldest part of the campus. And so we just want to make sure that beyond the capacity, the condition is also okay. So to answer your question, yes, we will have new buildings, but the hope is that every new building is looked at as a replacement of the old. And further down the list in the 23-25 request is preparation for demolishing Keeled Hall as a integrated science building for arts and science in the Pullman campus.
That's the Pullman Science Building listed here.
Yeah. So again, what we're doing is we're renovating 2 buildings adjacent to the building that's about to be demolished so that they can house the people who are in the about to be demolished building. Demolish that building and put a newer science building in its place. Part of our issue is, which is why we're careful not to say no new buildings, but no net new, is that some of the functions that we have, particularly in the sciences, in the research, they're currently housed in poor facilities. And so Keeled Hall, for example, is actually, in building terms, kind of a flimsy building. Windows are drafty, and it goes like this. So it's just not a very good science building. And so the money it would take to make it up to snuff, you're better off just building a new building. Now, in other cases, we will have buildings that are suitable for reinvestment, but potentially not as intensive a use. And that's partly what the data that we've accumulated tells you. We have a criteria for evaluating which buildings should be the keepers and the DNRs, we call them, that do not resuscitate. That's very grim if you happen to be in a do not resuscitate building. And then we have, what could go into it. So it's not just demolishing for the sake of demolishing, it's to say if we get a capital investment amount, it does two things. It gets rid of the backlog, builds buildings, renovates or build buildings that are suited for the science, but also fund the programs that are university priorities. If that makes sense.
I think an example of the renovation would be the Spokane building space that we got.
Yeah.
So we vacated the building from the uses there, got 15 million to renovate it, and it's in good enough shape to do that. And it's going to help with the programs here, because otherwise they're waiting for their turn of what was at one point an $80 million building. And so this way we get new space to them a lot sooner.
You'll also see Spokane in the 23-25 request. We had originally hoped that Spokane, because the chancellor has been working with other hospitals on an operating agreement for simulated education, that we could do what we were calling the funder and renter model. So we would have the partners either give us cash equity for the building, or they would agree to lease the building for long term so that the lease payments would service the bond. Unfortunately, because it's a very complicated arrangement, as I understand it, I don't profess to know all the details. We've not been able to pull that together. So we are asking for design money for that first phase, and then see if that buys us more time to get a new building up where the Jensen Bird is, which is that way.
So one way you could look at this is, say we got to the end of this list, that's a long time, that's 2033. If we were to redo that map that we did of the Pullman campus and all the deferred maintenance, the black boxes of what, buildings, would we see an improvement? Would this process help us move that dial to get some of that worse space off of our campus in a fiscally responsible way too?
Well, and what I'm also hearing is the model that the WSU Vancouver Life Science Building that has the public and private contributions is making its way through all of the, and actually probably even started before then, because I think about the baseball.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
Right.
Baseball.
So maybe even before that.
Yeah, maybe even global health would be an example.
Global health was, yes, that was true state and private because of the Allen gift, but that was kind of isolated in time. And so then we relied a lot on, actually, we borrowed money to do the press box and cultural center, et cetera, et cetera. And so really baseball was the first complete donor funded. And now we're talking about other projects in athletics. And it's actually Voiland that's the big significant, like 1-to-1 match. Actually, it's more than one because it's 30 million building 40. So I think we're moving towards that sort of thing. And I think that, as all the different chancellors start to flex their donor raising money muscles, we should see more of that. And what we're trying to do is to plan for a future that has all funds. So you have state funds, donor funds, you might even have borrowed funds, grant funds, whatever. So that's what we're trying to do, is to look to a future where it's all funds that would maximize our ability to fund these things.
Seems pretty smart to me. The materials were really easy to follow and to go through. I really appreciate the time and attention. And And the kind of the explanation around the no net new. And what you mean by that, that doesn't mean no new building.
It's no net.
No net new.
I think the other thing about this process is it's pretty extensive on the campuses. So we have the facilities liaison group that has about, how many people? Like all colleges and campus leaders, and we go over and discuss these things. And the good part of that is, you know, people are seeing that your college might not be on this list for funding in the next year, but they understand the process and the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's helped with the campus communications of understanding, you know, the process that we use. And dare I say, a sense of fairness of, we use criteria, but it's, you know, it's not all about the numbers. It's, you use your criteria, you score, you rate, you rank, and then you have a list of projects that can go through these different leadership groups to determine why programmatically we might do this one before that one. So the data helps build the case, but then you still have to do the decision making.
But it's like, in other contexts, we say it's not data driven, it's data informed. So that's partly what we're doing.
Well, and there's an extensive stakeholder outreach process that you're speaking to. So this memo also was really helpful too. So I know it's the model that you're building around all these new other kind of operating budget and, you know, all the other, you know, kind of initiatives right now. But this was helpful to kind of walk through, okay, how did we get to where we're at? Because you're looking at a 10-year picture, you know, even though this is, we're submitting for 2023 to 2025, it's 10 years. So I don't have any other questions. I really do suspect my other regions would have many, many questions, but I feel really pleased to have had a little time with you, because I did have a couple of these questions that I thought I would ask in the next session, and look forward to the presentation at 2:30.
We should mention about the OFM. I mean, even though it's, I don't know if it's official or not, but what they're doing, they're recognizing our inflation problems.
So OFM in the supplemental capital budget allocated a bit of money. I say a bit, I think it's something like 80 million. And you would say, well, that's not a bit. Well, yes, it is, because
how many buildings are undergoing
how many people are going to be standing in. So we plan to put a request in to for Vancouver. So if possible,
if that's okay with you.
I know exactly where we go.
So, being a cheapskate that I am, I'm hoping that we get some, and we can say, you don't have to use this.
Yeah.
Hang on to it first, see how far we get, and then if you say, well, really, I didn't need that money, he's gonna say, then we could finish more.
Yeah.
Or, you know, as you know, I've always worried that you just don't know what's gonna happen still, you know, between the labor problem and the materials problem. It's so rare that you have both problems at the same time. It's usually you have a labor problem or you have a materials problem. But now we have both. And I just don't know what horrible mutation will come out of that. And so I'm always kind of watching for it. So in a way, it gives us kind of a belt and suspender thing. We have the local funds and we have the state funds. So hopefully.
Is there any way you can get in line first?
We do have a big hole in the ground now that we would.
Well, our person at OFM, we have a standing joke, because every time I go talk to him, he'll put a box of Kleenex in front of me. Okay, tell me your sob story. A very sad story. You'll tell me your sob story. So, I mean, he's also a kook, so that helps. But he understands the context, the deferred maintenance problem, what we're trying to do about it. I think also to the point that we would raise later, the fact that we're trying to ask for what we think we should get instead of asking for what we really want to get is helpful, because then they're not in the awkward position of, well, you want the $20, you want to get 15, so which 5 do I knock out? If we just go and say, well, how about 15 and 75 cents? You know, that just makes their job easier. And with Chris Milik's help, we've been talking to OFM and with legislative staff, so that there's some familiarity about our story and what we're trying to do. And Chris is really big on us being good citizens. So, let's say, don't be greedy. Don't ask for
Yeah, and we do get input from that. That's a good point, from our governmental affairs, external relations people too. But the other positive here is we're telling all of our stakeholders the same story.
Right.
Whether you're a donor or you're a legislative staffer or a regent, we're saying this is our process, this is how we do it, and this is, this is how you can help right here, and so, and then, like I said, we're telling the same story so that deans get really upset, as do chancellors, if they hear one thing in this meeting and, something else over here. So this really,
Not
really
this chancellor.
helps us with consistency of messaging, because, we had a dean kind of upset of, I thought I heard this and now you're saying this. And so Olivia and I are pretty keen to now wait a minute, this is the message and this is what it is we can do. So we keep refining this to make sure that it's, the message gets more clarity as we go along. So
It's not always the happiest message. So our goal is to make sure everyone is equally impacted.
I was just reminded that Brené Brown tells us clear is kind. It was in an employee relations
Yes.
context, but still, I mean, I do think that the more clear we are, the probably better it is for everyone around. So
Yeah.
Yes.
The inflation recognition by OFM is a big deal.
Mhm.
So
we're hopefully optimistic.
I mean,
Hopefully we do
It's,
that.
it's very interesting in dealing with the designers of the contractors. They said every other state that they're working in, people have gone back to the legislature to ask for additional funds. And they were wondering why we weren't doing the same thing. And so I think it's interesting that we now have that option to be able
It's
to.
not a lot
to
of
do
money,
that.
I have to say.
No,
But maybe it will be more if this is successful. I mean, the
Yeah.
thing is everybody is impacted by it.
yeah,
And so I think as the state looks at that to say, well, we don't really want to shut these projects down, nor do you want to scale them back significantly, that this might be a good use of one-time funds.
Yeah. yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And any $1 million helps.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing.
Right.
It absolutely does. So good.
okay, well, thank you both for the time and all of the work to get prepared for this committee and the next big committee. So I will just say that we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting, and the Regents will be taking a break, and we'll be back at 2:30 for the Finance and Compliance Committee. And the YouTube link for the remainder of the meetings can be found on the WSU Board of Regents website. And then I think that's it. We're done.
Thank you. Thank you. Even-
So for our next meeting, I got another message from OFM today that the tuition limit is 2.4%. So I'm going to have to reduce in the materials and in the action from 2.5 to